interesting. One of the things I find absolutely astounding about a lot of bloggers is that a lot of bloggers actually just try to do what actually national newspapers are doing very well anyway, i.e. what they really want to cover are all the things that will be covered as part of mainstream cultural criticism. So they want to review the new Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. They want to review everything at the National. They want to review plays at the Royal Court. What they don't want to review are the things that actually are not being reviewed. And I think that if you are a blogger, of course you can only be things where you are, you've got an area of interest. But the people, so for example, there's somebody called Mary Patterson, who writes really well and is making a living writing about live art, an area that the mainstream press, with a few exceptions, absolutely tends to ignore. There's somebody else called Kate Kavanagh who has something called the Circus Diaries and writes very informed criticism about circus and outdoor work and things like that. And I think you can completely and utterly make a niche for yourself. It could be really niche. Plays that include food, or but the point really is that actually, actually there is somebody, Peter Kerwin, who runs something called the Shakespeare blog, which he only ever reviews. Very good. He's based at the University of Warwick, and it's a very good blog, and he does indeed only review Shakespeare. But one of the things about being a blogger and being a successful blogger is, in a sense, about creating a brand, yes, for yourself. Horrible word, really, really horrible, but I'm afraid it's true. And the really good example, they've gone off the boil, and in fact one of them has got, but it's like the West End Whingers would be a really good example. Just a couple of gay guys, good friends, went to the theatre a lot, left the theatre a lot in order to drink red wine at the interval and not go back, decided that they would just set up a blog in order to do that, and they are the people, of course, who some of you, I'm sure a lot of you know, who christened the Andrew Lloyd Webber Love Never Dies, Paint Never Dries. But in fact, at their height, and I would say they are probably past it, they were really widely read and certainly kind of read by everybody in the business, because the way that they wrote, it was a bit spiky, it was always funny, they set themselves up, it was all those things, very, very successful, and I imagine getting a lot of hits, because actually, suddenly, as The Guardian does, we can have blogs, we have a London blog, we have a East London blog, we have people in the north, in the northwest, in the northeast, people who are on the ground who are immediately, that idea of citizen journalism, that suddenly, in fact, that you can report and talk in a way that you previously hadn't. I've got nothing wrong with the public reviews. I think it's great that it's there, but why should somebody read a review written by somebody that they've never heard of before, yes, or never read a word that they've written before, and kind of believe what they say on the basis of sort of one review? It seems to me that one of the things, what's talked about a lot by people like Tim Walker and things like that, is that what we're losing is authority, the authority of people who have seen Hamlet 35 times, and all those things. But actually, in fact, I don't think it's about authority. I think the question is about trust, really, in the end. And it's why I said earlier about why I think that honesty is kind of, the best thing that you can possibly have. Embedded criticism is something that's kind of quite a big term at the moment, which is one of the problems that arises for bloggers or people who've been writing for blogging websites, is about mostly you do not get paid, I am a dodo on the verge of extinction, in the sense that I am probably, one of the last of people who have a job and has a salary in order to write about theatre. Those jobs, without doubt, are disappearing. But I think we need to be careful about turning around and saying, oh, but that's a terrible thing. When the printing press was invented, it was absolutely fantastic for reading. Yes, it suddenly made reading widely available. What has happened with the web is that and digital, is that suddenly there are platforms that are making writing immediately, much more widespread. If you come from my generation, and you went to university, and so you had a degree, you were quite highly educated. Unless, like me, you went into journalism, and had a job which involved writing, most people in the 20th century, once they had left university, really never wrote at all, except a note for the milkman, or if they had to write a kind of report for work, because they were sort of a middle manager or something like that. So unless your job really entailed writing, you hardly wrote at all. You lot write all the time. You have written growing up even as teenagers, because I've seen my own teenagers do it, which is, whereas when I was a kid, kind of you had a phone conversation, they are constant, or were constantly kind of messaging each other. So I think we're seeing an explosion of writing taking place that is on a scale that is rather similar to what happened after the invention of the printing press, which saw an explosion of reading. So the printing press was fantastically good for reading. It was complete rubbish if you were a monk who had spent your time doing illuminated manuscripts. Suddenly, in fact, actually, the way that you earned your living doing illuminated manuscripts was no longer needed in quite the same way. So you were out of a job. And I think it's exactly the same what has gone on with what we've seen with digital, is that it's been bad for newspapers, but fantastic for journalism. What I do think is that one of the things that's really interesting at the moment is about people who are writing long form, often online, on sites like Exeunt or on their own blogs, and people like me who are writing in newspapers and who are often only writing at most 450 words about something. Is that I think that what often happens is that there's kind of set up that somehow we are in opposition to each other. And I think that is just not true at all. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is about the fact that bloggers often are able to do something that that reviewers like myself do less, because of that thing about the fact, quite honestly, I reckon that I could probably review a dripping tap and find some kind of meaning in it, if that's what I was faced with. But let's say that you're faced with a particularly difficult piece of work. Let's say, for example, it's a piece of live art rather than a traditional play. It's in a form, it's perhaps in a context, it's dealing with a subject matter of which you don't necessarily feel that you have the vocabulary. If you are me, you have to go and see that show, and then you have to write about it. At the very least, by kind of 9:30 in the morning the next morning, but frequently immediately after the show. I've certainly, the quickest that I've ever written a review in is around about 15 minutes after the show came down. But a really good example of recently of something that probably you all know, The Light Princess, which I reviewed at the National, and from the moment the curtain came down to the moment with which I had to file the review, I had 40 minutes. However experienced you are, there is an element where what you fall back on is that you tell the plot, because that takes up some words, You just cannot be as kind of thoughtful, as reflective, as layered, as complex as you can sometimes. I'm sure you've all been to see something, and you've come out and maybe you've not thought very much about it. You had a bit of a conversation with your friend or whoever you're with, and then you've forgotten about it, and then a few days later sort of you start thinking around it and things mull, and you start thinking more interesting things about it.